Oh, hey guys. Anyhow, this video is for entertainment and education purposes only. Any and everything I say could be wrong. Do your own research and come to your own conclusions. Thank you. Thanks. I'm just doing this video for fun, something to do. A little creative outlet, ritual. And anyway, so I guess what I was going to kind of go into in this video is dendrology. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. Dendrology. What is dendrology? Okay. I just don't even know how to approach things that I want to talk about. You got to get creative. It's like a person has to get creative, because if a person just kind of just goes directly to, just speaks directly, like it just causes a lot of problems. And the reason is because there's just a lot of people on the internet that well, let me just put it to you this way. You know what I'm talking about. It's the internet, as they say. So anyway, so let's talk about dendrology. Dendrology is like the study of trees and everything related to that, right? And so you have the study of trees. You have dendrology, and so you have dendrologists. And dendrologists are people who are studied on the subject of trees, right? And I've talked about this before. So dendrology is the study of trees, and you can imagine. I'm sure you can imagine that there are people in the world that are actual dendrologists, where they have gone to school and college and actually gotten real education, where they're like scientists on the subject of dendrology, where they have a far deeper understanding of trees than your average person. A dendrologist, that's what a dendrologist is someone who's like super fucking geeked out on trees. And they know all of this shit about trees that you and I, we're just like clueless. We have no clue, right? That's what a dendrologist and dendrology, the study of trees, and those studied on the subject of trees, a dendrologist. So, let's say that I had a interest in trees, okay? And it became kind of a hobby, where, on my free time, I would go to, forests, some national forests, and really go there to like observe trees and try to learn about trees. And I might have a couple books on trees, and I just, as a hobby, I go and, sometimes I as a hobby, I try to learn more about trees for whatever reason, because for some reason I'm interested in that. Okay. And let's say I've done that for a few years, like 3 years, as a hobby, just a hobbyist, And I start to realize that, wow, I actually know a lot more about trees than your average person, because I this is my hobby. And after a few years of doing this hobby, I'm starting to realize I know a lot more about trees. I could like talk to somebody and say, hey, did you know what kind of tree that is? And they wouldn't know. And I'd be like, oh, that tree is whatever. Okay. And so I start to get really impressed with myself, because, this hobby I've been doing for a few years, man, I have knowledge on something that a lot of people don't really know hardly anything about. They can't even name they can't even name, they don't know, right? And, so anyways, my ego might start to get where I'm like, dude, I know more about this thing than anyone else or whatever, right? But when in all reality, even though I may know a good deal about trees because I've adopted this hobby and been doing it on my free time at my leisure, and even though, so I might know a good amount about trees that a lot of people don't, well, I might encounter a dendrologist, and that dendrologist knows way more about trees than I do, because they didn't just do it as a hobby. Like, they ended up studying it and got like a master's degree in dendrology or something. And then after they got their degree, they went into the field of dendrology and became a studied like scientist in the field of dendrology. So that person's going to know a lot more about dendrology than me, And depending on where I'm at, like if I'm somewhat humble, I would acknowledge that and be like, well, this guy knows, But or I could be like, have little humility, and when I run into that dendrologist, I just be like, oh, dude, whatever, bro. Like, you don't know more than me. I've been, depending on who I am and where I'm at, and how much humility I have and this and that, like, it would depend on how I would react and respond if I were to encounter a dendrologist who knows way more than me, on that subject. So anyhow, and that's what's, one of the things about dendrology that piqued my curiosity is I went through a phase where I was binge watching forensic files, and there was this big murder case, right? And they knew the guy killed these people, but they couldn't get the evidence, even though they knew. They just needed, it was like they knew. And that's what made it so frustrating for the investigators, is even though they knew they had this guy, they couldn't get him because they didn't have the evidence, okay? And so these investigators are brainstorming, how do we fucking get this guy? Because we know he did it. Like, it was like they knew it. And so they're like, we got to figure out how to get this guy. And so then they're brainstorming and going over everything. And then they realize that, well, one of the murders, the guy burnt the body, okay? And it was in a wooded area. And the guy was like taunting the investigators, because the guy knew that they knew. And the guy was taunting them like, yeah, fuck you, you're never gonna pin it on me, man. I've covered all my bases, like fuck off. You know, like he was really fucking with them. And so they started looking at this one element of the investigation because the dude had, you know, burned a body, and he used like wood. He used like branches of trees and shit like this from this wooded area to build the fire to, and that you know, to remove the evidence, to burn the evidence, right? And then these investigators are brainstorming, and then they started to realize they might be able to, you know, through dendrology, get the evidence they need. And so they had to go out and seek out a dendrologist. A dendrologist. And it was really hard because it's hard to find a dendrologist, you know, someone who's like expert levels of knowledge on trees. So they had to really dig to find a real dendrologist. And they found one, and then they ran all this by the dendrologist. Like, we need to, you know, we need to, you know, like find out everything there is to know about these particular woods in this area, et cetera, et cetera. And so the dendrologist isn't an investigator, isn't a crime investigator. So the dendrologist had a limited role. The dendrologist isn't coming in to, you know, investigate this murder. No, the dendrologist was asked to come in and investigate the wooded area because the dendrologist is an expert on trees. So the dendrologist just came in his limited role, only to his limited expertise to come in and you know, investigate the different trees and all this dendrology shit that very few people really know anything about except for a dendrologist. So the dendrologist comes in and he does his investigation and assessment, and he brings that information to the investigators, and the investigators were right in their hunch that if they got the scientific information on these trees in this particular area where the murderer used the trees to burn the evidence in this wooded area, they were right. They were right that based off of the information about that wooded area, they were able to prove that this guy murdered these people. But it was the dendrologist that broke the fucking case. And if it weren't for the dendrologist, that guy would have got away with it. Okay. So dendrology, right? Dendrology, you know. But so I'm 51 years old. I've seen a lot of trees in my life, you know. I lived in Idaho for many years. I fucking, you know, there's a lot of trees in Idaho, you know. I've been around. I've seen a lot of trees. You know, I've seen more trees than your average, you know, teenager or whatever. I've seen more trees, you know. But just because I've seen a lot of trees doesn't mean that I know anything about trees, right? But yet I can think that because I've seen a lot of trees, I know a lot about trees. And if I took up the hobby of studying trees as a hobby on my leisure time, I might think that I really know a lot about trees. But really, in comparison to a dendrologist, I don't know jack shit about trees compared to a dendrologist, okay? And so, like, and you know, this is just whatever. I mean, isn't this just common sense? Like, what I'm saying it's just common sense. That there are people that know stuff that other people don't. And you see how that works? So crime investigators know how to investigate crime. A dendrologist knows how to investigate trees. And see, when they work together, because a crime investigator isn't gonna have expert levels of knowledge on trees, because their expertise is investigating crime. And a dendrologist isn't gonna have expertise levels of knowledge on how to investigate crime, because they're a dendrologist. Their expertise is their knowledge is in the study of trees. But you see how when they work together, and so that would mean, so like investigators would have to humble themselves and say, hey, we don't know jack shit about trees, but because of our expertise in investigating crime, we know that if we were to get the information about trees, this could potentially crack this murder case. And so, and a dendrologist, you know, with that same humility, would be like, you know, I don't know nothing about investigating crimes, but I know how to investigate trees, you know? And so they come together. It's like, hi, we're these investigators. We have a particular knowledge and expertise on investigating crime, but we don't know jack shit about trees. But because of our knowledge on investigating crime, we're pretty sure that if we were to get information on these particular trees in this particular area of this crime site, that it would crack the fucking case. So we're coming to you, dendrologists, to ask your help, like, in doing this, participating in the investigation. And then the dendrologist would be like, well, I don't know anything about investigating crimes. Like, so I don't know how can I help you? All I know is how to investigate trees. And they'll be like, yeah, well, that would be your role. It's just to you know, examine and investigate and assess all the information about these trees in this area where this crime took place, and then give that report of that information to us. And he's like, well, yeah, I'm a dendrologist, so I can do that, but I can't investigate crime. And they're like, yeah, well, yeah, because we can investigate crime, but we can't investigate, like, you know, tree stuff. We don't have that expertise. And so they work together. And what happens? They crack the case wide open. But if it weren't for the dendrologist, right? So, anyways, only my haters and people with open mind would get this far in the video. So now that we're this far in the video, so as far as like dendrology, the study of trees and shit, I have those levels of experience and education on the subject of homelessness. And so I see my haters cringing and their assholes tightening up because they're getting angry because I don't have that. I don't have that. You know, their sphincters are just tightening at that statement. It's just something that by no virtue of mine, I have a lot of experience, training, field experience, field research and study, like tens of thousands of hours in all this. So I'm like a dendrologist of homelessness. If homeless people were trees, I would be like a dendrologist. And people get really upset because they're like, oh, their sphincter starts really, it's like, nah, no, you know. And so, you know, I don't really, it's whatever. I'm just cursed with this knowledge. It's a curse. And well, it's a curse and a blessing, you know, because, you know, I have knowledge on something, which is cool, you know. But the curse is that, you know, there's so many people that think that they know everything there is to know about homelessness. And they'll talk, whether they're talking to me, which has happened often, they talk to me in all their supposed knowledge of how knowledgeable they are on the subject of homelessness. And they'll try to talk to me, or they'll just be talking about it and I'll be listening, like on a video or something. And I've heard it all. Being a dendrologist on the subject of homelessness, I've heard it all. Like, and it's all just babble. It's like the equivalent of, you know, a toddler babbling about whatever. And there's nothing wrong with a babbling toddler. That's what toddlers do. You know, it's like, whatever, I don't care. You know, it doesn't make me a better person that because I'm older, I have more experience and therefore knowledge on stuff that a toddler doesn't. It's just whatever. And like, you know, just because I know a lot about the subject of homelessness doesn't mean that I know how to investigate crimes. Like going back to the forensic file story, the investigators know a lot about investigating crime, but they don't know anything about trees. And so because this case, you know, so they had to get with a dendrologist who doesn't know anything about investigating crime, but knows pretty much, you know, tons of shit about trees. And so they had to get together. You know, the investigators had to acknowledge that we don't know nothing about trees, but because of our knowledge in investigation, we know that if we were to find out about all these trees right in this area, we could probably fucking crack this case wide open. But we know we don't know nothing about trees. And so they sought out the dendrologist. And the dendrologist like, dude, I don't know anything about investigating a crime. What the fuck do you want from me? And they're like, well, we need you to look at these trees because you know about trees and we don't. And he's like, well, I can do that. I can't investigate a crime, but I can look at these trees and tell you. So anyways, but yeah, so like I've heard everything that the novice has to say about homelessness, and it's always the same. Oh, most or all homeless people are just lazy, mentally ill, drug addicted, criminal, degenerates who fail to take personal responsibility for their life support life decisions. And like to me, that's just like the most brain dead. Like it's just like, but you know, just like to a dendrologist, and I guarantee you, dendrologists have this happen to them all the time. Dendrologists have heard it all. They've heard it all from people that think that they're knowledgeable on trees when they're not in comparison to a dendrologist. And the dendrologist has heard all of this shit, all these different people saying all this shit when they don't know anything about dendrology at all. And that's the curse of a dendrologist, is that they just have to like, it's just like blah, blah, blah. They you know, and it'll be like, all trees are lazy, mentally ill, drug addicted, criminal, degenerates who fail to take personal responsibility for their life support life decisions. The dendrologist has heard all of this. All trees are just blah, 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 blah. And the dendrologist knows through all these tens of thousands of hours of field research, field application, field experience, training by leading experts. They hear the same thing over and over. Well, did you know that all trees are just a blah, 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 and that's all there is to know about trees? And the dendrologist has to hear this all the fucking time because they're a dendrologist. Because a dendrologist will be looking at, well, what are people saying about trees? And then they see that, well, all these people are still saying the same thing about trees all the time. You know, and a dendrologist will have conversations with people. They'll be like, oh, hey, what's your name, sir? Oh, my name's John Smith. Hey, John Smith. I'm Joe Blow. Oh, hey, Joe Blow. Well, what do you do for a living, John? Oh, I'm a dendrologist. What's a dendrologist? I study trees and stuff, and I got a degree, and you know, it's just my thing. Oh, trees. I know a lot about trees. Well, we should talk about trees. Oh, you do? Joe Blow knows a lot about, okay, yeah, I'd love to have a conversation with you about trees. Well, John, did you know that all trees are just blah, 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 and that's it? That's all there is to know about trees? Yeah, right. And I guarantee you, a dendrologist has this happen to them all the fucking time, dude. Like, that is it. Or the minimizing of the knowledge of trees. Dendrology, God, that is about the most worthless, you know, expertise. Why would anybody want to have expert levels of knowledge on trees? Trees are the most boring thing in the whole wide world. What really you want to learn about is the Jews, because it's the Jews. Don't you know it's the Jews, stupid? So the dendrologist is stupid. See, it's always. That's all the dendrologist will ever hear is that he's stupid because he's knowledgeable on trees, or that he doesn't really know about trees, and that this person with little to no experience or education at all just knows way more about trees than the dendrologist does, on and on. And Tucker Carlson is going to do a deep dive on trees because Tucker Carlson knows everything about trees, and it's this nationwide, news report on Fox News about trees, and Tucker Carlson's bringing it to you because Tucker Carlson knows everything even though he's never worked a day in his fucking life. I guarantee you, the dendrologist has seen and heard all of this nonstop. And the dendrologist can't do anything about any of it. There is no point in fighting it, in combating it, in trying to, you know, reason with these people like, bro, I'm a dendrologist, dude. I can explain to you where you are wrong, bro. Like, you are so far. There's no point in the dendrologist doing this because none of these people are ever going to listen to him. And so the dendrologist keeps going on as a dendrologist because that's what he is. That's what he does. He's an expert on dendrology, so he just continues his field of expertise, you know, with all of this going on, you know. And the dendrologist has a deep understanding of the importance of dendrology by just using that example of how, you know, investigators had to use a dendrologist in order to crack a case. So the dendrologist understands the value of dendrology, even though like the majority of people that aren't dendrologists have no clue at all whatsoever the value of dendrology, because all they think about is the Jews and how everything is the Jews. So that, you know, dendrology is dendrology. Don't you know it's the Jews, stupid? You know? And it just never ends. It just never ends. You know, Rush, the band Rush did a song called "The Trees." Remember that song by Rush, "The Trees"? You know, J.R.R. Tolkien used trees as one of the most profound analogies in the book. In the Lord of the Rings. Excuse me, I'm having some technical difficulties here. So So yeah, the J.R.R. Tolkien used trees as an analogy. One of the most profound like points of the whole book of Lord of the Rings. The Bible uses the mustard seed parable is about trees. You know, the parable of the mustard seed is extremely small. And so a person could assume that because a mustard seed is so extremely small, that it doesn't really have as much value because it's not going to be a big plant or anything. It's not going to, you know, because the seed is so small, you know, whatever it is that grows from that seed is just going to be small in comparison to bigger. But the mustard seed actually flourishes into this massive, massive fucking, tree. And so the Bible uses the mustard seed as a parable for that very reason. You plant the mustard seed and it can grow into one of the biggest fucking trees you'll ever fucking see. So anyways, that's all I got for now. See you boys.